The hum of the downtown Columbus law office air conditioner died mid-sentence. And for one heavy beat, every sound in the room vanished, as if the whole world had paused to absorb what the attorney had just read aloud. I was sitting beside my mother, my 2 kids huddled near the tall floor-to-ceiling window, my husband Beckett leaning comfortably in the chair right next to mine, and I had just learned I held full personal control over a $28.7 million trust left behind by my grandfather. No one would ever have guessed Arthur carried that kind of wealth. To the outside world, he was just a quiet, thrifty retired old man who wore the same scuffed brown wool overcoat through every Ohio winter, drove a dented old Buick with more than 200,000 miles on the odometer, and grumbled if anybody spent more than $10 buying takeout coffee. Family holiday dinners always unfolded simply. He never flashed expensive gifts, never bragged about investments or real estate holdings. I'd grown up believing he lived on a modest fixed retirement income. I loved him deeply, but I truly had no idea how. Thoroughly, he'd protected a fortune in my name long before his passing. Attorney Elena Cross adjusted her thin-framed glasses and flipped another sheet of the will document across the polished conference table. She'd already walked us through small personal bequests to local charities and a handful of old family friends. Then the language shifted, sharp and unambiguous. The principal beneficiary of the combined estate, all commercial rental properties, private company shares, and multi-layered investment accounts housed within the long-standing family trust, was me, Clara Hale Voss, not shared with my spouse, not divided among my children. Complete authority rested in my hand. My throat tightened, and my fingers twisted together in my... "Why never tell me?" I whispered, barely loud enough for the others. Elena offered a quiet, knowing... "Arthur told me many years ago that early knowledge of large wealth often warps how other people choose to... He wanted you to build your identity separate from money." That warning hung thick in the cool office air. It was then I felt Beckett shift beside me. He leaned in close, his elbow brushing against my arm, voice lowered, curious but... "Clara, do they have a rough total yet?" I turned my head toward him, still reeling from the shock of the... "I don't know, Beckett. She hasn't gone over all the appraisal." His hazel eyes studied my face intently, searching for some hint I might be hiding numbers. "You must have suspected something. Grandfather owned multiple buildings, right?" I blinked. Up until that afternoon, that line of questioning would have read like ordinary spousal curiosity. 17 years of marriage, 2 kids, countless late nights supporting each other through job stress, sick children, funerals, and household rounds. I'd always shared nearly everything. But something was different in his now. The warm familiarity was gone, replaced by cold, sharp calculation I had never seen directed at me before. It made me feel tight. "I honestly didn't suspect the scale of this," I told him, pulling slightly over his shoulder. He leaned back into his leather chair, jaw tightening just a fraction, and said nothing more for the rest of the meeting. Once the paperwork review wrapped up, Elena scheduled our follow-up appointment for 1 week later, where we would dig through every trust provision and property record. On our way out of the building, Beckett mentioned he had another work appointment across the city, so we would drive back to our suburban home separately. I watched him walk toward his sedan, his shoulders set stiff, and a tiny, unsettling thought flicked my mind, which I pushed away. This was my husband, the man I'd made vows to. Grief over Arthur's death was made sensitive. Back at our house, the ordinary rhythm of family life tried to smooth over the day. 14-year-old Nolan buried himself in his video game console the second we stepped through the front door. 11-year-old Lila chattered nonstop about an upcoming show. But Beckett's questions kept drifting back to the inheritance every chance he got over dinner, while we loaded the dishwasher, while we sat on the living room couch after the kid. "What did Elena mention about those commercial properties? Have they given you any ballpark range they're worth? We really need to sit down and map out how all of this works for the future." I kept my answers vague, repeating that we would learn more next week's meeting. Each guarded reply seemed to fray his little by little. Still, I clung to the memory of the man who'd held my hand at his funeral, who stayed up all night when Lila had a case of pneumonia, who laughed at my terrible joke road trips. I told myself I was overreading small moments, to lift the heavy tension hanging over our household, to plan. Beckett was heading to Chicago for a 3-day regional sales conference at the end of the week. The kids and I could fly out Friday afternoon, book a room in the same hotel complex, and surprise him at the final evening meeting. Lila insisted we bring his favorite salted caramel cheesecake from the local bakery as a fun gesture, and Nolan grumbled, but admitted he wouldn't mind sightseeing Chicago. I booked plane telling Beckett. Friday afternoon arrived. We packed overnight bags, dropped our dog off with a neighbor, and boarded our flight north. The city glinted under gray autumn's plane descended. We grabbed our luggage, rode the shuttle bus to the large downtown hotel, and walked through the busy lobby toward the main restaurant entrance where Beckett's work group to gather for dinner. My heart lifted. Looking forward to his face, I saw him. Beckett stood a few feet from restaurant doors, talking with a sharp-dressed woman in a navy blazer, one hand tucked into the pocket of his dress slacks. She reached out and lightly touched his forearm, and head back and laughed. I froze mid-step, my suitcase handle slipping in my grip. Nolan bumped hard against my shoulder from behind. "Mom?" he muttered. I lifted one hand, signaling both children to stay back behind a wide lobby pillar out of sight. My pulse hammered hard in my ears. I was in this conversation. The woman tilted her head, voice lowered. "Are you absolutely certain she will not put up a forward with filing?" Beckett's smile stayed fixed on his face. He glanced quickly around the lobby to make sure she was within earshot. "She doesn't have independent money of her own for a drawn-out legal battle," he said plainly. My stomach lurched sickly. The woman pressed further. "And the inheritance from her grandfather? What happens when that comes through?" Beckett lifted his weight, leaning in closer. "Once divorce paperwork is officially on file, we will force full disclosure. Then we find out exactly what she has." My breath caught sharp in my throat, pressed flat against the cold concrete pillar while the hum of hotel guests and clinking silverware drifted from the dining room behind me. Every word Beckett spoke hung heavy in the noisy lobby, cutting through background chatter like shards of glass. He had already thought this all through. Divorce, forced financial disclosure, digging for my grandfather's fortune, long before I had even sat in that law office hearing the will read. Nolan shifted restlessly behind me, his backpack digging into my back. Lila's small hand curled tight around the hem of my coat, oblivious to how completely my world had just tilted over. Confrontation screamed inside my head. I could step out from behind this pillar, march straight over, and call him out right here in front of his business associate. But one quick glance down at my two children stopped me cold. This was not the place for a public explosion. They did not deserve to witness their father stripped bare in a crowded hotel lobby. Silence was not surrender. It was the only way to learn exactly how deep this scheme ran. I bent low, mouth close to Nolan's ear, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. "We have to leave Chicago right now. No surprise, no cheesecake. We are heading back home." Nolan's eyebrows shot up in confusion, but he read the urgency written across my face and did not argue. Lila frowned, about to ask a flood of questions, yet I squeezed her hand gently and guided both children backward, step by careful step, away from the restaurant entrance, toward the hotel's main exit. I did not look back at Beckett. Every muscle in my body trembled as we hauled our rolling suitcases out to the shuttle stop. The airport was chaotic on that Friday evening. I scrambled to cancel our hotel booking over my phone while waiting in line, rebooked the earliest available return flight, and tried my best to shield Lila and Nolan from my inner panic. Once we boarded the plane and lifted off the Illinois skyline, Lila fell asleep, leaning heavy against my shoulder. Nolan stared silently out the aircraft window at the endless stretch of dark clouds rolling past outside. Halfway through the flight, he turned toward me, his voice quiet and confused. "Why didn't we surprise Dad?" My heart ached. I searched for words soft enough for a 14-year-old boy to absorb. Sometimes you learn hard truths before you are ready to hear. Some things can't be fixed with cake and a surprise. He nodded slowly, did not push for more answers, and turned his gaze back toward the night. We pulled into our suburban driveway well past midnight. The whole neighborhood lay dark, only faint porch lights glowing along the street. I herded sleepy children up to their bedrooms, tucked them under blankets, and waited until their breathing turned slow and the house was deathlit. I stood alone in our dim kitchen, refrigerator light casting pale yellow streaks across the countertop, and dialed Elena Cross's cell. She picked up on the scent ring. "Clara, it's very late. Is something terrible wrong?" I did not sugarcoat anything. I told her every single word I had overheard Beckett say inside that Chicago hotel lobby. I described the woman in the navy blazer, his casual certainty that I lacked money to fight divorce proceedings, his plan to file and force disclosure of the... There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line after I finished. Clara, do not confront, Elena said firmly. If he is building strategy around this trust, we need to map out everything he has done. Rushing into an argument will erase our chance to gather solidness. I leaned my forehead against the cool cabinet, my eyeing. Then Elena dropped the revelation that sent chills crawling down. Someone from Beckett's legal representation already reached out to my firm. They were asking detailed questions about your grandfather's trust. That correspondence landed in my inbox 3 full days before we held the official meeting. 3 days before. Beckett had been investigating long before we sat together in the conference room. Long before I knew a single detail about the $28.7 million. I hung up the call and paced the kitchen floor. Old, half-forgotten memories resurfacing one after another. Small moments I had brushed off as ordinary spousal concern now glowed red with warning. During my grandfather's final months of illness, Beckett kept pressing me for details about grandfather's real estate holdings. He had repeatedly urged me to sign refinancing paperwork for our family home, telling me I did not need to read every draft. He asked odd, pointed questions about old family accounts, questions I had answered with thought. Back then I called it care. Tonight I understood. Beckett got home from Chicago late afternoon. He walked through our front door carrying a rolling briefcase, acting completely remarkable. No hint of guilt, no flicker of worry. He kissed my cheek casually, asked about our supposed Chicago trip happened. I told him we scrapped the getaway because Lila had developed a mild headache, my lies bitter on my tongue. Yet I may ask. Did you get any new information from Elena about grandfather's estate? He asked, dropping his bag by the hallway closet, his tone conversational. I folded laundry at the dining room table, neutral. We still have our follow-up appointment next week. Nothing concrete yet? He lingered nearby, watching me work. You don't need to keep things from me, Claire. We are married. Whatever this inheritance turns out to be, it affects all of us. His words would have comforted me only a week ago. Now they sounded like a trap. I gave him a non-committal shrug and kept folding sweatshirts. He frowned slightly, sensing my distance, but did not push kids. That night, once Beckett had fallen asleep in our marital bed, I crept down into a storage closet. I dragged out the heavy fire-resistant home safe we had bought years before for passports and birth certificates. I dug out every will-related paper Elena had given me, scanned digital copies onto my password-protected private cloud drive, and locked the physical documents deep inside the interior. I spun the combination, it clicked shut. This was the first night I intentionally kept critical financial knowledge hidden from my 17 years. As I climbed back upstairs to the bedroom, I saw a sleeping face. I could still recall all the good years, all the laughter and hardship side by side. But a line had been crossed, and I knew there was no going back to the trusting life before Chicago. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many other secrets lay buried beneath family life. Early Sunday morning, sunlight barely touched the edges of our window shades when a sharp, authoritative knock boomed against our front door. Heavy, deliberate knocks, not the casual tap of a neighbor stopping by. My heart lurched. I pulled on a robe and crossed toward the entryway, glancing through the side glass panel. A man in a crisp, dark dress shirt stood on my front porch holding a sealed legal envelope in his hand. My fingers trembled as I turned the deadbolt and pulled open the front door. The process server held out the thick manila envelope without warmth, his expression flat and professional. Clara Voss? That's me. You've been served. I took the envelope, its weight heavy in both hands. He gave a short nod and walked down the front steps to his parked sedan. I closed the door slowly, leaning back against the solid wood, staring at the sealed packet in my grasp. Beckett had not even waited to sit down and talk. He had skipped every difficult conversation and gone straight to the court. I carried the paperwork over to our dining room table and broke the seal. Page after page laid out his divorce petition. He requested temporary control over a large share of our marital assets, claimed my financial circumstances remained uncertain, and planted the damaging phrase, potential undisclosed marital assets, right there in black and white. The irony burned cold. He was accusing me of hiding money while he had spent weeks sneaking around, investigating my grandfather's trust behind my back. My thumb brushed over the printed words again and again. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elena. They arrived, I said the second she picked up. I expected they would. Elena replied calmly. File service was only a matter of time. Can he legally reach the trust? My voice cracked just a little. not automatically because he filed for divorce. But we cannot grow complacent. We need every piece of documentation perfectly organized. I set the phone down after we finished our call, my gaze drifting toward the hallway. I could hear Beckett moving upstairs, opening dresser drawers, the faint rustle of clothing. He had known exactly when these papers would show up. By mid-afternoon, he came home early from work. He walked in, placed a thin manila folder flat on the dining table surface, and sat across from me like he was negotiating a minor business deal rather than dismantling 17 years of marriage. You should sign these, he said, nodding toward the folder. I did not reach. What are they? A settlement agreement. It simplifies the whole divorce process. Drag this out and it only hurts everyone, especially the kids. I stared at him. You already filed with the court before saying a single word. How much simpler could you want it? A familiar, self-assured smile tugged at my mouth. The same smile I had watched in the Chicago hotel. Let's be realistic. Clara, you don't have the income to fund a long, drawn-out legal fight. The words hung sharp in the quiet room. I had not noticed Nolan standing. He must have come down for a glass of water and overheard every sentence. His sneakers scuffed softly against the hardwood floor as he stepped into view, face tight with her. Mom doesn't need lots of money to be our mom, he said directly to father. Beckett's jaw hardened instantly. This is adult business, Nolan. Stares. No. No, head. You're the one always saying she doesn't make real money here. My did. All those throwaway remarks Beckett had made over the years had sunk in sun. I stood and rested my hand gently on her. My voice was soft but firm. It's okay. Go finish your homework. I will. Nolan hesitated, eyes moving back and forth between me and his father. At last he turned and trundled the staircase. Once his bedroom door clicked shut, Beckett lowered his voice. Frustration thick. You're making this far harder. I pushed the folder back across the polished wooden table toward him. I'm not the one who filed for divorce out of nowhere. You decided this path. I will not sign documents I haven't had any review. His expression flickered, a flash of uncertainty quickly buried under irritation. You are going to regret on this. I don't want to fight you at all, I told him. But I won't let fear push me into choice. And he stood abruptly, grabbed his briefcase and door. The garage door rumbled shut behind him, leaving me alone in the echoing house. When Lila and Nolan were both asleep that night, I wandered down the hall to my old den. We had moved his desk, books, and brass desk lamp into our home after he passed. None had been rearranged. The shelves still held his worn history books, dog-eared paperbacks, stacks of newspapers. I pulled open the top desk drawer, and there it was. A folded handwritten note addressed to me, dated 6 his death. I sank down into his worn leather chair and read it under the warm gas lamp. Clara, people will treat you differently once they learn what I have left you. Remember, their reaction speaks about them, not you. Guard what I entrust to you. But never let money convince you hold greater worth than anyone else. Your character was always a gift to you. Tears stung my eyes. He had seen every part of this. He knew wealth peeled away masks. Right then my phone buzzed on the wooden desktop. A new encrypted email from Elena had landed in my inbox. I tapped it open. Attached were several forwarded email threads. One thread between Beckett and his lawyer. But another name caught my attention immediately. Doreen, Beckett's mother. I scanned her message, cold and unflinching. If Arthur left substantial property holdings, Beckett must go away with everything. He is entitled to claim his fair share. My chest grew heavy. Doreen had never called to ask how I grieved for my grandfather. She had never in on my emotional state. She only cared about real estate and accounts, about what could be taken for her son. This was not only Beckett's plan. His mother had been from the sidelines. I sat back in the chair, letting truth settle over me. For years I had tried so hard to win Doreen's approval, cooking holiday dinners, remembering her birthday gifts, swallowing small to keep family peace. All of that effort had meant nothing. To her I was just a vessel assets for Beckett. I texted Elena quickly. How deep is involvement in all of this? Elena replied minutes later. Deeper than we initially suspected, and I have just recovered copies of documents you signed 3 years ago at Beckett's request. They are critical. I am sending scans over right now, to Beckett for any reason. My phone pinged again. A new attachment loaded onto the screen. Thumbnail previews popped into view. Those old forms I'd signed quickly. trusting Beckett's word teen housekeeping paperwork. I leaned forward, looking at the small printed find. My breath caught. These documents had given him far-reaching permission to probe into my family's financial records, authority never realized I was handing over. The glow from my phone screen lit up my face as I stared at the scanned document Elena had sent. 3 years prior, sitting at this very dining room table, I had signed those pages while Beckett assured me they were nothing more than routine administrative forms tied to a commercial property my grandfather owned. I had skimmed only the first few lines, trusting the man I married. Fine print clauses granted broad permission for third-party financial inquiries, permission I would never have knowingly surrendered. That night I dragged every storage box from our basement into the dim basement fluorescent light. Cardboard containers stacked knee-high held old tax returns, closed account bank statements, faded household contracts, email printouts, and piles of paperwork I had never bothered to sort through. The air smelled of damp concrete and old paper. I worked long after Nolan and Lila fell asleep, flipping through folder after folder, hunting for original copies of every paper Beckett had asked me to sign without full explanation. My hands grew cold from the chill underground. I found the original folder close to midnight, tucked at the bottom of a plastic storage bin marked Home Refinance 2021. Inside sat the physical copies, refinancing addendums, property inquiry authorizations, and one ambiguous form granting limited access to family trust-related record requests. I pulled out my phone camera and photographed every single page, capturing margins, handwritten notes, and signature blocks. I sent the complete photo batch directly to Elena's secure messaging portal. 20 minutes later, her reply popped up. Do not reference these documents to Beckett under any circumstances. They are our quiet leverage. I climbed back upstairs well past 1 a.m. The house was silent. Beckett was staying at a friend's apartment those nights. The master bedroom felt large and hollow without him. I sat at the kitchen counter with a mug of lukewarm tea and read through the summary Elena had prepared about Ohio marital and inherited asset law. I learned that assets received by one spouse through a trust, established before marriage and funded exclusively by a third-party relative, qualified as separate property, unless marital funds had been mixed into the trust account. That single detail anchored me. My grandfather had structured everything carefully, keeping marital income completely segregated. Still, Elena warned, Beckett's legal team would fight hard to argue for partial division, trying to cast doubt on how the trust had been managed. Days slipped. The atmosphere inside our suburban home stayed taut. Beckett came over several times for child swap visits. He no longer openly badgered me about the inheritance. Instead, he wove casual-sounding questions into ordinary-sounding small talk. Had I spoken to the bank? Was I still meeting Elena? Had I gone through the property inventories? Each question was another quiet probe. I answered in short, non-committal sentences. Information had become a form of protection, and I was no longer handing it away. The settlement conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning downtown. The night before, Elena walked me through every piece of evidence we would lay on the conference table. Timestamps of emails sent by Beckett's attorney pre-reading, Doreen's aggressive message demanding assets for her son, the old authorization forms I had unwittingly signed, and records showing Beckett researching family trust divorce precedents online. She told me to stay calm, to avoid shouting or emotional bursts, and let the documents carry. I dressed in a simple charcoal blazer and slacks Tuesday morning, dropped Nolan and Lila off at school, and drove toward the high-rise. Cold November wind bit my cheeks as I walked up the concrete steps. When I pushed open the glass conference room door, Beckett was already seated beside the attorney. He leaned back in his chair, ankle crossed over his knee, relaxed and self-assured. When he saw me walk in, he gave a thin, triumphant little smile, as if he believed this meeting would end with me folding. I sat down. Plain. Long wooden conference table, a coffee brewer in the corner, a framed photograph of the Columbus skyline wall. No dramatic music, no audience, yet the future of my family hung in this. Beckett's attorney opened the discussion with polished journalism. We are hoping we can resolve all marital matters efficiently today, without dragging a judge. Ina nodded. We share that goal. But efficiency cannot mean accepting one-sided terms. Beckett turned directly toward me. Clara, none of this needs to turn hostile. We can reach something for everyone. I bit back the sharp retort burning on my tongue. He had hired legal counsel and filed divorce behind my back. He had investigated inheritance in secret. Now he wanted to lecture me avoiding hostility. I kept my voice level. I agree. Hostility isn't necessary. Honesty is. His smile faded. They moved methodically through standard marital asset topics: our suburban house, 2 family vehicles, retirement accounts, medical insurance, and projected expenses. Everything proceeded normally until his attorney shifted focus to father's estate. Mr. Voss holds the position that this inheritance ought to be considered when dividing overall marital property. We also require full access to trust record examination. Elena folded her hands atop the table. The trust documents clearly establish these as separate inherited assets, but we have additional material record. She slid printed copies of email correspondence across the polished wood toward Beckett and his lawyer. First came the messages showing Beckett's attorney reaching out 3 days prior to the will reading, hunting for trust details. Beckett's posture shifted, his jaw tightened. These are just routine exploratory questions, he argued. Elena flipped pages forward. Exploratory questions sent before you had any official confirmation inheritance existed. Next, here is from your mother, Doreen. Beckett scanned his mother's email, face growing pale. My mother was simply worried for my future. She'd stand the facts. Then we have these authorization documents, Elena continued, sliding out the stack of forms I had photographed in the basement. Documents Mrs. Voss signed 3 years ago, granting authority for financial inquiries into her family estate or personal request. You never explained their scope to her. Beckett's attorney scanned the fine print, throwing a quick, sharp glance toward his client. Why was it not disclosed earlier? I did not consider it Beckett snapped. It becomes extremely relevant, Elena replied evenly. When your divorce petition accuses my client of undisclosed assets. These records demonstrate you were already investigating those assets long before filing. The air inside the conference room grew heavy. Beckett's carefully constructed narrative, that I was a secretive wife hiding wealth from my husband, crumbs by printed piece. He fidgeted in his chair, direct eye contact with me. His attorney attempted to steer the conversation back toward compromise. The momentum had shifted. After more than an hour of tense back and forth, binding settlement was reached. The conference adjourned. Outside, the November wind whipped across the city sidewalk. I pulled my coat collar tight around my neck as I stepped off the building steps. Beckett hurried up before I could reach my car. Clara, can we talk just for a minute? I stopped and turned to face him. Office workers streamed past us on their lunch break, talking inside for over. Not like this. From lawyers and paperwork. His voice softened, trying for the old intimacy we once shared. He tried to frame himself as someone hurt and misunderstood. He blamed most aggressive moves on pressure from his mother, insisted he had only for our children's stability. I listened without interrupting, but I felt the old pull toward sympathizing. I had read the email threads. I had seen the preemptive investigation. Fear had never been his primary driver. When he finished speaking, I shook my head. You knew what you were doing, Beckett. Lay all of this at Doreen's feet. He stared at me, defeated, and stepped back. I turned and walked toward my vehicle. On the drive home, my phone rang. Elena's name lit in. I pause button. Clara, I've received the fully verified court appraisal report. All property holdings, investment portfolios, and instruments have been audited and valued. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. What is the number? $28.7 million. I woke long before my alarm went off on the morning of the final hearing. The house lay wrapped in quiet pre-dawn gray. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed steadily, and somewhere out on the street, a car rolled past on wet pavement. I lay in bed, eyes fixed to the ceiling, knowing that by the end of this day, large pieces of our old life would be gone forever. I pulled on a tailored navy suit, the fabric crisp under my fingers. In the bathroom mirror, I saw exhaustion etched under my eyes. Not defeat, just months of carrying secrets, fear, and constant quiet vigilance. 17 years of marriage had taught me loud outbursts rarely won anything. Strength lived in staying calm long enough for facts to speak for themselves. Elena met me right inside the courthouse entrance. The heavy stone building smelled of old paper, floor wax, and cold marble. She gave me one short, steady nod. Remember our plan. Do not rise to bait. Let the documents carry our argument. We walked down the wide corridor and stepped into the courtroom. Beckett sat beside his attorney at the plaintiff's table. He looked polished, confident, that familiar easy smile resting on his face. When his gaze landed on me, he tilted his head slightly, almost as if he still believed he could outmaneuver me. Directly behind him sat Doreen, dressed in a cream-colored suit, her posture rigid and composed. She caught my eye for half a second, then quickly looked away. The bailiff called the court to order. Everyone stood as the judge entered and took his seat on the bench. The hearing unfolded routinely at first. Attorneys went over the marital home, our 2 cars, retirement accounts, health insurance, and projected monthly expenses for Nolan and Lyon. Beckett's lawyer stuck closely to his script until he shifted toward the inheritance. Your Honor, critical questions remain regarding the scope and nature of Mrs. Voss's inherited assets. We request full access to every trust record to properly evaluate marital property division. The judge turned toward Elena. Ms. Cross. Elena stood carrying 3 thick binders, passing them to the court. Your Honor, we have submitted complete trust founding documents, estate probate records, property appraisals, and investment statements for review. Pages rustled as the judge flipped slowly through stacks of paper. Beckett leaned forward in his chair, shoulders lifted with expectation. He still had no grasp of the exact dollar figure. He only knew there was substantial wealth. After several long minutes of silence, the judge glanced over toward Beckett's legal. Your filing alleges Mrs. Voss's financial position is Yet these submitted records appear remarkable. Beckett's attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Your Honor, we maintain there are open questions whether portions of these inherited holdings should qualify for marital. That is a separate legal argument, the judge replied. It does not negate that the assets definitively exist, Elena spoke again. Your Honor, the overwhelming majority of these holdings originate from a third-party trust created years before Mrs. Voss' marriage. No marital income has ever been deposited into these trust accounts. The judge kept reading. Then he lifted his head and fixed his gaze direct. Voss, you opened inquiries into this trust before you filed your divorce petition. Is that correct? Beckett's admiral bobbed. I asked my attorney to make general inquiry, Your Honor. I only suspected there might be evidence. Suspected? Repeated. Your written correspondence suggests you believe the potential value could be equal. Beckett offline. Has the court received a finalized, verified? The judge, Elena. Honor. She handed over the report. The courtroom sank into near total silence while the judge documented. The faint tick-tick-tick of the wall clock echoed off wood paneling. I heard a quiet, sharp intake of breath from behind Beckett's table when the judge finally lifted his eyes. The verified evidence. Before this court places Mrs. Voss's inherited net worth at approximately $28.7 million. Time seemed to slow. Beckett's confident smile dissolved completely. Color drained from his face. He stared straight at me, not burning with rage, but raw, stunned regret. He had gambled on an unknown windfall, never imagining how enormous it truly was. Behind him, Doreen shot right out of her chair. The legs of her courtroom seat scraped loud the tile floor. $28 million? Her voice cracked, loud enough for every person in the room to hear. She swayed. Her hand grasped wildly for the back of the wooden chair. Before anyone could react, her knees buckled. She crumpled sideways. A attendant rushed forward. The judge immediately called for a short recess. Chaos rippled through the room. People stood murmuring. Doreen was helped into a chair, gagging to regain her bearings. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap. I felt no rush of triumph, only a heavy, hollow sadness. During the recess, Beckett covered to my side of the room. His tie sat slightly as his face worn. Clara, he said quietly, I never knew it was this large. I looked at him. You knew enough to hire lawyers and dig for information before the will was even read. You planned a divorce built around whatever thought I might receive. If I had understood, he started. That is the core problem. I cut in gently. You were ready to discard 17 years of our life together based on what you could take from me. Not marriage had fallen apart. He flinched to push back. The bailiff called court back into session minutes later. Doreen sat pale and quiet, attended by a court staff member. The judge addressed the core property question. He explained Ohio's separate property rules in plain terms. Because the trust was established by my grandfather, funded entirely by his assets, and had never been mixed with marital income, the vast majority of the 28.7M inheritance would remain exclusively mine. Beckett's formal legal claim to a share of the estate was rejected. The court would still resolve child support, parenting time, and division of jointly owned household assets. But the fortune my grandfather law. When the hearing concluded, slowly out of the courtroom, Beckett lingered near the glass courthouse doors. He glanced my way once, to attempt another conversation. I walked past him without stopping. Fresh daylight hit my face outside. I had won on every legal point, yet as I climbed into my car, a heavy weight settled over my chest. Beckett and Doreen's schemes had been defeated in court, but this very public explosion would not simply disappear. Nolan and Lila would eventually hear whispers. Pieces of this dramatic day would circle back toward them. I turned the key in the ignition, parked car for several long minutes. Nothing like relief. That night after the kids went, Elena called my house. The formal written findings from court would arrive within days. The divorce decree itself still required fixing, but she warned me. Beckett might try to manipulate the children, paint himself as wronged, stir up old family drama and private space. Documents could not speak for me. I hung up the phone and wandered to the back window, out over our dark suburban yard. Everything official had been settled inside court walls, but the real messy human aftermath was only just beginning. 3 months had slipped past since that chaotic day inside the county courtroom. The divorce decree was fully signed and filed. The legal battle was over, yet healing moved far slower than any paper document. Beckett rented a modest one-bedroom apartment across town, 45 minutes away from our suburban house. We worked out a standard parenting schedule. Nolan and Lila spent every other weekend with their father, one weeknight dinner midweek. The shouting, the late-night standoffs, and legal summons were gone from our daily lives. But quiet grief lingered in every corner of our home. Lila struggled most. Some evenings over dinner, she would softly ask whether we would all gather for Thanksgiving again, whether the 4 of us could sit around the same holiday table like we used to. 14-year-old Nolan rarely voiced his feelings out loud. He withdrew into headphones and homework, seldom volunteering stories about his time at Beckett's apartment. I learned quickly children do not need every brutal detail of adult betrayal. They need consistency. I showed up for every school drop-off, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer match. Every night Lila insisted I check underneath her bed for imaginary monsters. Kid swap moments on the front porch stayed restrained. No warmth, no lingering arguments. Just short, practical exchanges. Have a good weekend. You too. We kept our conversations focused entirely on the kids' schedules, doctor appointments, and school events. One Saturday morning, Beckett showed up 20 minutes early. The children were still upstairs pulling on jackets and stuffing backpacks. He stood on my front porch, hands buried deep inside the pockets of his worn winter coat, gray November sunlight washing over his face. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Privately." I pulled the front door closed behind me so our voices would not carry inside to the kids. Crisp, cold air bit my cheek. "What is it?" He stared down the quiet residential street lined with bare oak branches. "I started going to counseling. Weekly sessions." I nodded. "That struck me as positive." "That's good." "I know I don't deserve your sympathy or forgiveness," he continued, his voice low. "I've replayed that courtroom day over and over. Everything you said. I spent years measuring my own worth, and yours, by paycheck numbers. I was so fixated on security and status I never stopped to see how much you carried running this household, raising our—" He lifted his gaze toward me. There was no calculated charm this time, no business mask. Just exhaustion and genuine remorse. When I filed for divorce, I assumed you had nothing special. When I learned how large the trust was, for a split second I wondered if there was a path to fix us. If we could go back, my heart twisted. Part of me ached for the life we once shared. 17 years of birthdays, funerals, late nights with friends. But I could not unhear what I'd overheard inside that Chicago hotel lobby. I could not erase months of secret investigation and manipulative pressure. "Beckett," I said gently but firmly. "The damage was done long before we stood in court. This marriage broke not because of money, but because of what money revealed about your choices. I am glad you are working on yourself, but there is no going." He accepted my answer without anger. No pleading, no dramatic outburst. He just nodded slowly. "I figured you would say that." I needed to say it out loud anyway. I don't hate you," I told him honestly. "Hate would weigh me down for the rest of my life. But I cannot trust you the way a wife needs to trust her husband. We only move for co-parents." Upstairs, footsteps thudded. Lila came barreling down the hallway, backpack bouncing on her shoulders, Nolan behind. Our difficult conversation reached its natural end. Beckett shifted immediately into father mode, greeting the children, helping Lila coat. They climbed into his sedan, and I watched the car down the street. In the weeks following, Doreen left repeated voicemails on my phone. At first I ignored them. Too much had happened. But her messages grew less defensive, quieter, filled with quiet requests, just for conversation. Eventually, I agreed to stop by her house one weekday afternoon, after school. Her home felt smaller without its roof. The bright decorative throw pillows and family photographs on the mantel could not hide how space had become. She poured me a mug of black tea at her kitchen table, her hands trembling faintly as she set McMugs. "I owe you an apology. A real one," she ambled. I sat back and waited. When word reached me about Arthur's inheritance, all I could think about was Beckett's future security. I fixated on property, accounts, what my son might gain. I never stopped once to ask how you were grieving your grandfather. I never thought about you as a person, only as someone who held assets. Her eyes glistened. I treated you like you were not quite good enough for him for years. That shame sits heavy with me. I sipped my coffee, believed her regret was real. Still, remorse did not adequately rebuild trust. I hear your apology, but things cannot go back to how they were. We will act only around the children. She did not push for a closer bond between us. No demands for family holidays together. She understood the boundary I was drawing. We sat in silence for a minute, curling upward from our mugs. Outside her kitchen window, gray clouds flow across the sky. Then Doreen leaned forward slightly across the table, a deep plain on her face. "So what will you do with all of that money? $28.7 million is more than most people will ever see in a lifetime." I paused. I had already spent many late nights talking with Elena and my financial advisors, plans for the trust. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but I had shared those ideas with no one up until this moment. I held my reply, letting the question hang between us. I sat across Doreen's kitchen table and let her question hang heavy in the cool, dim room. Bare branches scraped against the fogged window panes. Late autumn light leaking thin gray streaks over the Formica countertops. For months I'd weighed what to do with the fortune Arthur left behind. I could have chosen quiet mercy, turned the other cheek, buried every damning exhibit and walked away to start fresh. But the thick stack of time-stamped emails, signed authorization forms, and attorney correspondence locked in my home safe burned fresh in my memory. Mercy without accountability only rewards manipulation. Arthur's note had warned me wealth reveals character. It never demanded I surrender my right to hold bad actors responsible for the harm they inflicted. "I won't blow the fortune on sprawling mansions or flashy luxury sports cars," I said flatly, my tone steady and unshakable. "Nolan and Lila will get fully locked away education trust accounts, covering every possible cost for college, trade school, travel, whatever futures they dream up. Grandfather's commercial real estate portfolio stays under neutral professional management, its profits feeding back into our family and community work. The remainder will seed a large community foundation running free financial literacy workshops all across central Ohio for stay-at-home spouses, young newlyweds, single parents, anyone who has ever signed confusing paperwork out of blind trust in a partner. I lived that vulnerability. No one else should have to learn those brutal lessons the hard way I did." A flicker of relief crossed Doreen's lined face. She had clearly braced for me to waste millions on frivolous indulgence, and for a split second she looked ready to offer hollow praise. But her relief shattered the instant I continued speaking. "That is what I intend to do with the inheritance. What I choose to do with the mountain of evidence we compiled is an entirely separate matter." She blinked in visible shock, her coffee mug clinking softly against the table surface. "What evidence?" "The divorce is finished. The court hearing is long over. The original divorce decree only divided marital property. It never ruled on Beckett's calculated pattern of deceptive pre-divorce scheming," I told her, leaning forward slightly. "All those documents he pressured me into signing under false pretense. All the behind-the-scene inquiries to financial institutions days before my grandfather's will was even. Your own emails, urging him to strip me of my family assets before I even understood what I owned. 2 weeks ago, Elena and I filed supplementary court sanctions filings. Every timestamp, every technibit, every copied form is back on the official public. All color drained slowly from Doreen's cheeks. Her fingers tightened so hard around her ceramic mug, her knuckles blanched white. "You cannot reopen this. That is unfair. This was only private family." "I am not reopening asset division," I corrected sharply. "I am pursuing sanctions for bad faith litigation. Beckett swore under oath in his original divorce petition that my finances were uncertain and alleged I might be hiding marital assets, all while he secretly hunted down every detail of my grandfather's trust. The judge has already accepted our submission. Doreen's lips parted, but no retort came. For decades, she had meddled from shadows, confident her manipulative messages would stay hidden behind closed doors, safe from public scrutiny. Now, every greedy, self-serving line she had written would sit permanently within the public court case file, for anyone to plead. I did not linger to watch her crumble further. I rose from my chair, grabbed my coat, and walked out of her house without a single comforting word, no hug, no tentative truce. Forgiveness was a gift, and she had done absolutely nothing. Back home in my sunlit small home office, Arthur's crumpled handwritten note remained taped to the edge of my computer. I found myself rereading its lines late most evenings. I understood its true meaning now. Protect what is entrusted to you. Protection was far more than locking money away. Trust. It meant refusing to let scheming people walk away scot-free after trying to 6 weeks passed. The supplementary court ruling landed in my email inbox one Tuesday afternoon. The judge had combed through every piece of evidence. The official judgment handed down formal, written sanctions against Beckett. He was ordered to reimburse nearly all of my additional legal fees accumulated fighting his pre-divorce plot, a bill that ate deep into his personal savings and wiped out almost every dollar he had been hoping to set aside for his own future. Worse still, the judge's published written opinion explicitly called out his deliberate bad faith conduct and quoted segments directly from Doreen's interfering emails within. Word rippled fast through their tight-knit local family social circles. Doreen, who had once reigned proudly over neighborhood ladies' luncheons and church social committees, found herself frozen out. Old friends learned what she had done, and invitations dried up overnight. Women who once sought her advice now crossed the room to avoid speaking with her. Her carefully polished social reputation, built over 40 years, completely. Beckett's professional life painful hit. A co-worker stumbled across the public court documents. Whispers spread through his regional sales office. Colleagues learned how he had plotted to exploit his wife's inheritance before the feud even settled. His manager passed him over for a long-promoted senior position he had chased for years. The promotion went to another candidate instead. Overnight, every status goal he had burned so much energy chasing. One night, my phone lit up all from Beckett. I pressed speakerphone and set the device on my desk, no urge to pick up. His voice came through, bitter and desperate. Clara, drop these sanctions. You have $28.7 million. You do not need this money from me. You have ruined my reputation. You have destroyed my mother's social life. Is this how you honor 17 years together? My voice stayed cold through the speaker. You ruined our 17 years the day you stood in that Chicago hotel lobby and plotted to divorce me for my inheritance before I even knew it existed. Every consequence landing on you now was written by your own hand. Withdraw the filing. I ended the call without waiting for his reply. Our co-parenting arrangement stayed intact, but the court added iron protective guardrails. Beckett was legally forbidden to press me about any financial topics, barred from speaking negatively about Nolan and Lila. Any violation risked automatic to his parenting time. He had zero choice but to comply. He was going up for counseling sessions, but any faint fantasy of reconciliation between us burned completely to ash. He saw firsthand there was no more manipulating me. Could slip through. On a crisp Saturday dusk, Nolan and Lila grabbed thick fleece blankets and joined me on our back porch. The sun dipped low behind the tall oak trees, spilling vivid burnt orange and rose pinks the backyard grass. Crickets began their steady hum in the tall underbrush at the property line, and a cool autumn breeze stirred the dry fallen patio stones. Lila snuggled her head against my shoulder, hers quiet and curious. Mom, I heard Dad had to pay a whole bunch of lawyer costs. Grandma Doreen doesn't get invited to her big lunch groups anymore. Did you make all that happen? I chose my words carefully. I would never teach children to celebrate other people's ruin, coat reality. It all happened because of choices Lee made, I told her, gazing out toward the tree line. Every lie, every secret plan, every greedy email. When people's choices hurt others, real consequences follow. I never wished suffering on them, but none of it ever took place. Nolan leaned against the wooden porch railing, his thoughtful teenage toward the fading sunset. Dad doesn't ramble about property every time we visit his apartment now. He only about soccer practice and homework. That is what real accountability looks like, I said. Sometimes people only begin to change once they understand carry a real price tag. Does everything is perfectly happy now? Lila tilted her head and asked. I let out a soft, honest sigh. Not perfectly happy. Some hurts from all these months will linger with us forever. But we are safe, and we are finally free. Lila giggled and poked her arm. Dad is still our dad though, right? I laughed, wrapping an arm around her. Nothing will ever change that. We sat together wrapped in blankets as twilight deepened around us. The $28.7 million trust had given me critical leverage and the resources to fight back. But my true victory belonged entirely to the truth. The truth I overheard hidden behind a concrete pillar inside that Chicago hotel lobby. The truth laid out page after page in stacks of court exhibits. I had not destroyed Beckett and Doreen out of mindless rage. I simply allowed their own schemes and lies to circle back home to them. My old marriage was long buried. 17 years of shared joy and heartache had dissolved into cold betrayal. Yet standing out on that back porch with my 2 children close beside me, I held something infinitely more precious than any real estate portfolio or investment account. I had fully reclaimed myself. The genuine inheritance Arthur left behind.